Deeper Than Music Radio. Behind every great song is a greater story.
Good evening where you are, whether it be iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify. Today we have a very special guest. She's on the special On My Block. She plays a mob boss. She was also in The Shield, The Shrink, Mayans M.C, Grey's Anatomy, and Canal Street. Ladies and gentlemen, we have actress Ada Luz Pla here on Deeper Than Music. How you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me. It's so great to be on your show. It really is.
Not a problem. Y'all smile and happy. I know on my block you play a mean mob boss. Not mess around. I wanted to ask, how do you prepare for a role like that? Like, how do you get into character? Like, what research did you do to?
You know, it's interesting because before I had auditioned for that a couple of years ago, I had booked a role in a film, in an independent film that was telling the story of Griselda Blanco, who was a real notorious mob boss from Colombia. I had that film never came to fruition. Fast forward a couple of years later, when I auditioned for On My Block, here I am. You know, so preparing for that role really helped me to hone in on who Cuchillos is, who's the character on My Block. So that's that. It became a little bit easier to do that. But with Griselda Blanco, obviously, you know, you have a lot of documentaries that you can look at. There were some interviews that I was able to look at. I was able to talk to someone who knew her son, and I was able to get a lot of background on her story. So I likened a lot of who Cuchillo is to Griselda Blanco.
Wow. So even though the initial role that you auditioned for didn't come to fruition, here you are, another opportunity presents itself on My Block. Right. And did you always know at a young age that you wanted to be an actress and pursue that career in acting?
You know, I did. You know, my mom is really talented. My mom was forced to drop out of school at the age of, I think it was 13 or 14, to help put food on the table. So my mother only went up to the 8th grade. So she worked in, factories and worked as, maids and homemakers and blue collar work. But before that, she was chosen out of, I don't know how many girls to do a film in Mexico. And so my grandfather at that time, we're talking about the 1950s, I don't know, ish, 60s, I don't know. They frowned upon that. They didn't think that women, who were actresses were respectable women. So he forbid her from, pursuing any of that. So that was always a part of her. And she, my mom is a festive woman. She's always dancing around the house, and she helps me with my lines here and there in the broken English that she does. She also, in high school, she used to sew my costumes because she's a very good seamstress. So she was very involved in making sure that, and the way it started for me was because I'm from Castle Hill Projects. I'm from the Bronx. So for her, it was as a means, for her, my dad, it was as a means for them to keep me out of the streets. So they introduced dance and, the arts, and I fell in love with it.
So initially you started off in theater and dancing. That's how you started off?
I started off as a dancer, is how I started off. I used to dance. And then I started auditioning for high school plays. And then from there, it just went on.
And when did you make the move from New York to California to pursue your acting career?
California. So here's the thing. I wanted to do Broadway. That was my dream. So I studied at SUNY Binghamton. I was supposed to be a lawyer because that's what my father wanted me to be. In particular, a criminal lawyer for obvious reasons.
Okay.
But I told my dad, I said to my dad, as much as I love, as much as I want to make you happy, I have to make myself happy. I gave you that high school diploma. Now it's my time to do what I need to do. So I ended up being a sociology minor and a theater major. And then I went on to AMDA, the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, and that was to prepare me to do Broadway.
Okay.
While I was there, I had a mentor who passed away. He was actually murdered. Who told me, he said, one of the last things he said was that there's going to be a huge explosion of Latinos in film and television. So you might want to consider, making that move out there, because there's a need for people of color, and this is your opportunity. So that was the first time I heard that, and this was back in '92, I think. But then my father passed away, and I ended up taking a job briefly as a social worker. It was actually a case manager. I did that for 2 years to just help my mom transition. And then I told my mom, I said, I'm gonna give you 2 years, and then I'm coming out west. So I was doing theater in New York, and I remember one of my fellow thespians talking about coming out to LA. And so we planned it. One of my roommates came out here in December. I packed up my stuff for $500 in my pocket, moved out to Van Nuys, California with 2 roommates, no job. I ended up working on IHOP and doing some extra work for a little bit. And then that was it. I booked right away. I auditioned for a show on BET, actually. It was the first sitcom that BET ever had, which was called The Blackberry Inn. I played a character named Chessie for 2 seasons.
Wow.
And that's when it started.
So, going from theater, New York, to now Hollywood land, LA, what was like, because I say LA and New York are like night and day. What were like one of the biggest reasons or differences when you that you noticed when you moved from New York to LA?
New York is a melting pot of everybody, and in particular, we're like sardines. So some people might think that that's a bad thing. For me, it was a great thing, because you really, when you are living on top of one another, next to one another, you start to realize that we're all part of the human race. And even though we have cultural differences, they're very little, So I grew up in a predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhood. And so we were like brothers and sisters. And so, I love that. I love that unity that we had back on the East Coast. And it was very Caribbean. I'm from the Caribbean islands. I'm Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican.
Okay.
And so I miss that salsa, merengue, bachata, I miss that, hip hop. I miss the melting pot. And here in LA was a little bit different. And it was something that I had to get used to.
Well, yeah, because it's like it's more separate. I noticed my hometown.
Yeah, more segregated. Yeah.
I'm from San Antonio, and growing up in San Antonio, I didn't realize how much of the spat it's like we're like infused Latin and African American. Like we do piñatas, we eat tamales. I thought that was all normal. But there was, the neighborhood we lived in was mixed, but there was a little bit of that separation. And even when I lived in San Diego, that separation. But then New York, like you said, like all my friends that are Puerto Rican, Dominican, we're like brothers. And it's weird you say that too, because I traveled to Panama, and Panama was like a family reunion, except everybody. And then I've been to Bogota, Colombia. And to be honest with you, I felt really at home there. The people were warm, nice, and educated me on how Africans influence on the music and the culture, something that I never knew.
Right.
What was
it's like that in Puerto Rico. Like when you go to Puerto Rico and Cuba and the Dominican Republic, it's really the African culture and the Taino culture is really visible.
Yeah.
You see it in the music, in the foods, in the customs, it's just, you see it, it's still there,
How was it like working at BET and then being their first sitcom? What was that experience like?
That was a dream come true. That's my first job. I will always have love, for BET, and for I'm still close to everyone who was a part of the show, and some of us are not in the business anymore, but we're still Facebook has been able to keep us close. It's funny because I saw Laura Hayes, we used to call her Miss Laura, at Ross not too long ago. It was like we it's like we never left. We hugged each other, and those are my, it's my peeps.
So throughout your vast career, you've been on CSI, Grey's Anatomy, Mayans M.C. What has been like so far, like the biggest challenge or a challenge that you had to face in your career?
I think that, especially in the 90s, in the late 90s, there was this sort of misconception that Latinas had to be hot, they had to be sexy and spitfire-ish, and there was this stereotype about us, and I didn't fit that norm. I was more the cute girl next door. So I can tell you one experience. I was looking for an agent at the time, and I went into the office, and I remember the agent telling me that I didn't fit the mold of Salma Hayek, and that I needed to go back to New York to do Broadway because that's where I was going to find work. He also said that because of my reel and because he thought I was really talented, that he would take a chance on me. But I was going to have to spend thousands of dollars, and I was going to have to do a whole makeover. And even then, he was going to put me at the bottom of the pile. And so deep inside, I was really horrified and, so discouraged. But, I think coming from the Bronx and, having thick skin and being able to have a comeback, I told him I was cool. On the outside, I was cool. And the inside, I was dying. But, I was going to let him see that. And so I said, I can respect that. And I said, why don't you give me, a piece of paper and a pen? And I signed my autograph, and then I gave it back to him. And I said, someday you're going to see that name. And then I walked out. And as I was walking out, he says, I take that back. I take that back. You are hot. And I was like, okay, thank you. And then I went into the car, and my husband, who was my boyfriend back then, he was like, how was it? Did you, and I was just bawled. I was just crying. So, that there was those stereotypes, that I've always had to face, as many of us have, but you just have to be strong, thick skin, and not listen. We would sit around listening to half the world. We could go anywhere. I'd still be in the kitchen cooking rice,
And I guarantee that person, he wasn't part of the culture. And it's funny, like you mentioned, the 90s, a lot of typecasting, right? A lot of roles that, I guess that was the beginning of Fox, the beginning of In Living Color, and all these other, people started to create their own narratives, but there was still that typecasting. But you also got to work on Grey's Anatomy. How was that experience? Because I know that show was very diverse and ahead of its time, even back then.
Yeah. It's interesting. Debbie Allen directed my episode, and it's always been a dream come true for me to work with Debbie Allen. So I was so happy just being in her presence. She had me at Fame.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I was a dancer. So,
yeah.
I was like, I could die and go to heaven right now. It was just such a great experience working with her. And she embraced me and really, really made me a part of the family. I was only supposed to work, I think, one day, and she kept me on to work a couple of days extra. So I was just like, thank you. She was so cool and down to earth and talented. You can see her work. I really admire her. She's one of my heroes. So it was all good. It was gravy.
And how's that? Because we talked about the struggle and being seeing a woman of color directing an episode. How was that?
It was, I've been able to be directed by many different, by men, Anglo men, Latino men, Latina women, Black women, Asian women. And I have to tell you, it depends. I think that people directors who really understand actors or who take the time to take acting classes, or at least have a knowledge of acting classes, whether they're male, female, black, white, whatever. I think that a director that works with actors or has a knowledge of the process, those are the ones that I think that I can relate to more, because they really take the time to say, okay, so what is your objective, and what, let's sit down and talk about the character, So that's just my take.
So they understand, like, so they could see it from an actor's perspective, and they would know how to motivate. Wow. Mayan M.C. I know you were shortlisted for an Emmy for that. How did that role come to fruition for you?
So I had no idea what Mayans M.C was. It was the pilot that I was auditioning for. And I wasn't familiar with Sons of Anarchy. Mayans M.C is a spinoff. Yeah. So when I went to go read for it, my agent, sent me the audition. I turned it down initially because of who I was playing, and I was playing a hooker. That was the title. I didn't even have a name. It was a hooker. And not that I judge or anything like that, but I had just started working again. I had taken a long hiatus to raise my boys, because my husband is a stand-up comedian. He travels a lot. And so, I told my agent was really instrumental in helping me to get back to work. She says, when you're ready, let me know, and we'll start from there. And so I asked my parents, my children, and my husband permission, because I'm old school like that, so that we can have it, so that I can go back to work as a family, so that we'll all be a part of the process. But the first thing out the gate, well, that wasn't the first thing out the gate, but that was one of the first, things that I knew could potentially lead to something long term. I was a hooker. And where I am in my life, as a wife, as a Christian, as a mother, I just didn't feel comfortable. And I just said, I will not be doing this role justice. I think it's important that as an actor, you are fully committed in the role that you are playing. Mm-hmm. I also know that as an actor, you have limitations as to how far you can take it, or how much you can say, I don't feel comfortable, Case in point, when I went to the audition, the casting director's assistants looked at me and said, you're reading for a hooker, right? And I was like, yeah, I know. My intentions was not to book the job. My intentions was to make a relationship with the casting director, because my agent was like, just go read for it and, see how you feel. I think you're going to enjoy the role. Yeah. When I read this role, I immediately broke down and I couldn't stop crying. And I just connected with this character in a visceral way. I connected with her past, her pain, the trajectory of her life, how she ended up. And I was curious to find out as an actor, because it doesn't give you her past. You have to create the past. Yeah. I was curious to see what that was like. And when I got the job, I was like, well, I'm in it now. I don't have any choice. But it was interesting to see how society really discards women like that. The character that I play, Celia, certainly doesn't feel like she's a victim. As far as she's concerned, she's a survivor. She's a tough cookie, and she knows the inner workings of how to deal with a male-dominated world. Celia will cut you, and spit you out with no hesitations. Because she comes from a place of survival. And pain breeds pain. The pain that she's, we usually hurt those that we love the most, right? We take out our frustrations and our anger and our dysfunctions and all of that baggage on our children a lot of times. That was her story. But it was so interesting to really delve into her past, to chisel away at that pain. And the way I likened that was to women who are afflicted with drug addicts, with drugs,
Mhm.
mental illness. And we know we always have that one family member who's a little off, or
Yeah.
that one
Yeah.
family member who's a drug addict. It just so happens that her vice or her work was as a hooker, so that was it.
I like how you say, at first it's like, well, it says hooker on paper, but then when you dove deeper, there was a backstory, right?
Oh
And I
yeah.
like with most people, we throw, we're quick to assume, but we don't know a backstory. And there's always a reason why, there's always a reason why this person is, but we don't take the time to know the backstory, right? We just see what it is on the outside and we're quick to judge.
Yeah, because I don't know of anybody that grows up and says, when I grow up, I want to be a hooker. When I grow up, I want to be that drug addict. When I grow up, I want to have mental. No one says that. Something happened in there was some sort of scar, something that happened in your past that led you to that path.
And how did it feel to be shortlisted or know that you were, you were getting recognition? Like, how was that feeling? Did you ever think when you had the role, like, this is gonna have that type of impact? Or
I did not. I went into it falling in love with Celia, falling in love with the cast and the crew, and Mayans MC is always going to be a part of my family.
Mm-hmm.
Just falling in love with the process and really just enjoying the moment. And to be shortlisted for an Emmy, it was something like, this happens to somebody else, never me, So yeah, I was shocked, and I was grateful and blessed.
Wow. And and also with your diverse career, what has been like a highlight, like, or a moment like, wow, was that one of those moments, or have you had?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can always say I was shortlisted for an Emmy,
Yeah.
I didn't get nominated yet, but I believe that if it's in God's will, it'll come,
And also you have a production company. Can you give us a little, like, how did that come to, what was the genesis of your production company?
So DNA Media Productions is a production company that I started with my husband in 2010. And the reason we started that production company was because we were just tired of auditioning for the stereotypes. And we just decided that in order for us to change how things are done, we have to be a part of the change.
Yes.
So we just started to write projects in the likes and in the way that we want it to be perceived, not to say there's anything wrong with playing maids or cholas or, thug number 2 or thug number 3, but there's more to life than that, So we have to be proactive, not just in front of the camera, but we also have to be proactive behind the cameras, you know. Can't nobody tell our stories better than we can, and that's the truth.
Exactly. So I imagine you've been to an audition where it's like it's just a typecast audition. You said thug number.
And I have been so many maids. I can do a reel and entitle it "Made in Hollywood."
Oh my goodness. Because what's that new? They have this new Netflix movie. It's called is it called Hollywood?
Yeah, Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like
the backstory of Hollywood. Yeah.
And the girl or the woman that plays the maid, and she's kind of intelligent, and they're like, yeah, hold on.
And it was interesting, right? Yeah. How she was like, she was, this is my job, and he was like, can you be a little bit more Hattie McDaniels? I was like, no, they didn't. I was like, no, they didn't. And Hattie McDaniel has an interesting story herself. She really paved the way. A lot of people say to me, not a lot of people, but I've been asked, why would you take on a role of a hooker, or why would you take on a role of a mob boss? aren't you perpetuating the stereotypes?
Mm.
Well, my answer to that is I'm not being offered anything else. I'm not being offered other roles. Roles like this are not being written for me. I have to write these stories for myself. But it's like Lotto, you have to be in it to win it, and these particular stories that I have played, although I was very hesitant to play them for many different reasons. I love these characters. They have substance. There's something behind them. Their stories really spoke to me.
Yeah. And do you feel, so thinking back to 1991 when you first started to now, do you feel like there's diversity? Do you feel like it's getting better? And what needs to happen for it to fully be diverse?
So here's the thing. I think that number one, yes, we are. The diversity is growing. We see it a lot more in front of the camera. I think we need to see it a lot more behind the camera, as producers, as writers, as we have to be directors. We have to be part of the voting process. Anytime they talk about the Oscars so white and the Emmys really didn't represent people of color, I think that we have to be part of the voting process.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Behind those. So we have to be more proactive and more visible behind the scenes, I think.
That's a good question. That makes me wonder, how diverse is the voting? That's a good question. I never really thought about that, but it makes sense. We have to be the curators and also be part of the people that select. Man. So say for instance, there's a little girl, she sees you on TV, she watches On My Block, she listens to this interview. What advice would you give somebody that looks up to you and wants to follow your footsteps career-wise?
So one of the things that has helped me in my life is to always put God first. I say God, family, humanity, and then career. And I know that sounds, crazy, because it's like you're putting your career last. But I think that it's important that we don't forget that we are human beings first, and we have to be giving souls because that's what God has asked of us, and everything else will follow. I think. Be disciplined. You're gonna hear so many no's. Take me for instance. I'm not thin. I'm not the ingenue. I've always been the girl next door. I've never been the hot baba boom type, and I'm okay with that. You have to be okay in your skin. You are your only person. There's nobody like you. Don't stop. If this is what you love what you do and do what you love, and work hard. Work at it, because it's not just gonna miraculously appear. If you want to be an actor, take classes and really hone in on your craft, because it's like a basketball player. Kobe Bryant was a perfect example. He stayed on his game, on and off the court. Same thing with your craft.
Yeah, no, you're right. I heard Kobe was very competitive.
Yeah. Learn everything. The other thing is, this is one of the other things I'm learning as I got older, or as I'm getting older. When I was younger, I was so busy trying to hone in my craft and being the best that I can be within the acting field, that I really didn't pay too much attention to the business side of it. And as actors, we are also business people, and we have to treat ourselves like that. The networking. Sorry, that was my son. The networking, just the business aspect of it. So when I was younger, I wish I would have known that a little bit sooner. But
Oh, yeah.
it is what it is, right? This is my journey.
So like, learn
And
your
enjoy
craft.
the process. Enjoy the process. Every audition that you go to is going to lead you to a job. Every struggle, whether it is having to eat a can of tuna fish for 2 years because you're busy, that's the process. That's your process. You can talk about it someday.
Yeah. A lot of people don't focus on, they focus on the end. They don't focus the process, because you learn as you toughen up, you season as you're learning the process.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being on Deeper Than Music. My last question is shameless promotion of when we get back to normalcy, what projects do you have in the works, and where can people hear about you, find you on social media? Shameless promotion
So
time.
everything is on hold right now. So all the projects that I'm supposed to be working on is yet to be determined. But you can find me on social media on all as Ada Luz Pla -Williams. That's on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, the whole gamut.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Ada Luz Pla, and check her out on My Block. And again, another great interview. And we saying good night, good morning, good evening to wherever you are. This is Mark and Ada Luz Pla signing off for Deeper Than Music.